Ethan chuckled as he leaned back against the couch, stretching his arms over his head. You're kidding, right? His deep brown eyes glimmered with amusement as he looked at Mia, who stood before him with crossed arms and a tense expression. I'm serious, Ethan, she snapped. Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about. He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. Mia, come on. You know I would never cheat on you. And I'm just supposed to believe that? Her voice wavered, but not with hurt. No, it was something else. Something he couldn't quite place yet. Ethan sighed, rubbing his temple. They had been together for nearly 3 years. In all that time, he had never once given her a reason to doubt him. He was the guy who sent good morning texts, planned surprise dates, and always came home to her. The idea that she'd suddenly suspect him of being unfaithful was almost ridiculous. Almost. Something about the way she was looking at him made his amusement fade. Her arms weren't crossed in anger. They were crossed in defense. Her gaze darted away when he held it too long, her lower lip caught between her teeth. A strange sensation settled in his chest. Mia wasn't hurt. She was anxious. And then it hit him. She wasn't accusing him because she believed he was cheating. She was accusing him because she was guilty of something herself. The thought landed like a weight in his stomach, his hands clenching into fists against his thighs. You know what, Mia? His voice was calm, too calm. Why don't you tell me why you really think I'm cheating? Her breath hitched, and for the first time, she had no answer. Ethan's amusement drained away as he watched Mia struggle to form a response. She opened her mouth, then closed it just as quickly, her fingers tightening around her arms as if she were holding herself together. The silence stretched between them, thick with tension, the air in the room growing heavier with every passing second. He had expected her to scoff, to roll her eyes and throw another baseless accusation at him. That was Mia's style, fiery, stubborn, always quick with a sharp retort. But now, she looked cornered. A slow, uneasy feeling crawled up his spine. Mia, he said, his voice quieter this time, his tone carefully measured. Tell me the truth. She scoffed, but it lacked her usual confidence. I am telling you the truth, Ethan. You're hiding something, and You don't believe that, he cut in smoothly, watching as her expression faltered. You don't even sound convinced yourself. She took a step back, her jaw clenching. Oh, so now I'm imagining things? Now I'm the crazy one. Ethan exhaled sharply, standing from the couch and closing the space between them. He wasn't angry, not yet, but frustration simmered beneath his skin, coiling tighter the more she tried to deflect. He had been in relationships before Mia, but never had he been accused of something so blatantly untrue. And never had he felt this creeping sense of unease. His fingers flexed at his sides, forcing himself to stay calm. I have never cheated on you, Mia. Not once. I've never even thought about it. She laughed, but it was hollow.
Right.
Because you're just the perfect boyfriend, aren't you? I never said that, he replied evenly. But you know me. You know how I feel about loyalty. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, but Ethan caught it. And suddenly, he knew. His stomach twisted. This wasn't about him at all. Every little thing that hadn't made sense in the past few weeks came crashing down on him all at once. The late nights at work that hadn't been an issue before but suddenly became frequent. The way she'd been pulling away, subtly but surely, always keeping her phone close. The tension in her shoulders when he hugged her, the distant look in her eyes when she thought he wasn't paying attention. She had been avoiding him, because she was the one with something to hide. His jaw tightened, his mind racing through the possibilities. Had it been going on for a while? Was it someone he knew? Or was it just some mistake she was regretting? The worst part was that he didn't want to believe it. He didn't want to see her this way, as someone capable of betrayal. This was Mia. His Mia. The woman he had spent 3 years building a life with, the woman he had imagined a future with. But the guilt in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. You're not mad, she murmured suddenly, almost as if she were realizing it at the same time he was. Ethan inhaled slowly, forcing himself to look at her. Really look at her. He should have been mad. He should have yelled, demanded answers, accused her right back. But he wasn't the type to explode. That wasn't who he was. Instead, he felt a cold kind of clarity settle over him. "I'm disappointed," he admitted, and the way she flinched made his chest ache. Mia shook her head, her hands dropping to her sides. "Ethan, Don't," he cut in, his voice firmer now. "Don't lie to me." Her breath hitched, and for a moment, he thought she might actually tell the truth. But then she did what she always did when she felt cornered. She lashed out. "You know what? Fine," she spat, her eyes flashing with something unreadable. "Maybe I did make a mistake. But you weren't exactly innocent either." He stared at her, stunned. "Excuse me?" She threw her arms out. "You were always so perfect, Ethan. Always so predictable, always so good. And it made me feel like shit." She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "Like I was just waiting to disappoint you eventually. And guess what? I did." Ethan felt the words hit him like a punch to the gut. Of all the things she could have said, that was the last thing he had expected. "So you cheated because, what? Because I treated you too well?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now, a quiet disbelief. Mia turned away, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know, okay? I don't have a good reason. It just happened." That was the moment he knew it was over. Because cheating wasn't something that just happened. It was a choice. A choice she had made, over and over again, every time she saw him, and chose to keep lying. Ethan let out a slow breath, steadying himself. He had always thought that if their relationship ended, it would be because of something beyond their control, life pulling them in different directions, circumstances changing. Not this. Never this. "You should go," he said quietly. Mia spun back around, her eyes wide. "Ethan, you don't love me," he continued, his voice steady despite the weight in his chest. "Maybe you did once, but not anymore." Tears welled in her eyes, and for a second, he almost felt bad. Almost. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He swallowed the lump in his throat, nodding once. "Yeah, me too." And with that, he turned away, walking toward the door, knowing that if he looked back, it would only hurt more. Because love wasn't supposed to feel like this. Ethan didn't look back when Mia left. He listened as the door clicked shut behind her, the silence that followed pressing in on him like a weight. He had expected anger to come rushing in, but all he felt was exhaustion, a deep, bone-weary kind of tiredness that settled in his chest and refused to leave. He stood there for what felt like forever, staring at the empty space where she had just been, trying to convince himself that he had done the right thing, that he had walked away before he could let her twist the knife any further. But that gnawing feeling, the one that told him there was more to this than just betrayal, wouldn't go away. Because something didn't add up. Mia had cheated, yes. That much was clear. But her excuse? Her reason for doing it? It didn't fit. He knew her, knew how her mind worked, and something about her words had felt forced. Like she was hiding something. The thought shouldn't have mattered. It shouldn't have concerned him at all anymore. But Ethan wasn't the kind of man who could let go of a puzzle without solving it first. And this felt like a puzzle. A week passed, and Ethan found himself going through the motions of life as if nothing had changed. He went to work, answered messages from friends, even managed to laugh at a joke his coworker made. But beneath the surface, he was restless. It wasn't until he ran into Liam, Mia's best friend, that the first piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Liam was standing outside a cafe, scrolling through his phone when Ethan spotted him. He considered walking past, avoiding the inevitable conversation, but Liam looked up at the last second and froze. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Liam exhaled sharply and shoved his phone into his pocket. "Ethan." "Liam." A beat of silence. Then Liam ran a hand through his hair, looking guilty as hell. "Look, man, You knew." Ethan's voice was quiet, but there was no mistaking the accusation in it. Liam flinched. "It's not what you think." Ethan crossed his arms. "Oh, because what I think is that my girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, cheated on me and you, her best friend, knew about it." Liam hesitated. It's complicated. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Make it simple. Liam looked around, then gestured for Ethan to follow him. They walked a few steps away from the cafe, out of earshot of the other customers, and Liam sighed. I didn't know at first. Mia, she wasn't exactly open about it. But when I found out, I confronted her. Told her she was making a mistake. Liam looked away. She told me to stay out of it. Said it was none of my business. Ethan's jaw tightened. And who is it? Liam hesitated again, and that hesitation told Ethan everything he needed to know. It wasn't just some random guy, was it? Ethan asked, his voice dangerously calm. Liam swallowed hard. Ethan, man, Who was it? Liam sighed, rubbing a hand over his face before finally meeting Ethan's gaze. It was Jason. Ethan felt the world tilt for a second, his breath leaving his lungs in a sharp exhale. Jason. His best friend. His best friend. The betrayal he had been holding at bay, the anger he had managed to suppress, came rushing in like a tidal wave. Mia had cheated on him. That had hurt. But Mia had cheated on him with Jason. And that was something else entirely. Ethan clenched his fists, his jaw tightening as memories of the past few weeks came flooding back. Jason had been around. He had been there, watching Ethan fall apart, pretending to be a friend while knowing exactly what he had done. A cold, calculated kind of rage settled in Ethan's chest. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. Ethan stood there, frozen, as Liam's words settled over him like a storm cloud. His best friend. The man he had trusted like a brother. The man he had known for years. Jason. The rage came slow, like a flickering flame catching on dry wood. It started in his chest, a quiet burn, and spread outward, coiling around his ribs, settling in his fists. He had been played. Lied to. And the worst part? Jason had smiled in his face, acted like nothing was wrong, like they were still the same friends they had always been. Liam shifted uncomfortably beside him. Look, man, I know this is a lot, but how long? Ethan cut in, his voice eerily calm. Liam hesitated. A couple months. Ethan clenched his jaw so tightly it hurt. Months. Not a mistake, not a one-time lapse in judgment. This had been planned. Repeated. Hidden. While Ethan had been loyal, loving, devoted, Jason had been sneaking around behind his back. His fingers curled into fists at his sides. Where is he? Liam paled. Ethan.
Where is he?
Liam sighed, rubbing a hand over his face before shaking his head. I don't know, man. He's been avoiding me ever since I told him I knew. Ethan didn't believe that for a second. Jason wasn't avoiding Liam. Jason was avoiding him. And that was the smartest thing Jason could have done. Ethan inhaled deeply, trying to steady the storm brewing inside him. He had two choices: let the anger consume him, hunt Jason down and make him pay, or play this smart. And Ethan wasn't the kind of man who let emotions control his actions. He had been blindsided, but that didn't mean he had to act recklessly.
No.
He was going to handle this the right way. A slow smirk tugged at the corner of his lips, the first real expression he had worn since learning the truth. All right, he said smoothly. Let's play a game then. Liam frowned.
What?
Ethan turned to him, his eyes dark with something unreadable. Jason's hiding because he thinks I'll lose my temper and come for him. He rolled his shoulders, his voice dropping lower. Let's make him sweat. Liam stared. Ethan, tell me something, Ethan murmured, tilting his head slightly. Do you think Jason actually cares about Mia? Or do you think he did it just because he could? Liam hesitated before answering. I don't know, but if I had to guess, I'd say he did it to prove something. Jason's always had that jealous streak when it came to you. Ethan's smirk grew. That was exactly what he had thought. Jason didn't want Mia. He wanted to take something from Ethan, to feel like he had won. And that made Jason vulnerable. Good, Ethan said, his tone light, but his eyes glinting with something dangerous. Then let's make him realize that he didn't win anything at all. Liam looked at him warily. What are you planning? Ethan turned away, already forming a plan in his mind. Don't worry about it. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Just sit back and watch. He wasn't going to break things in a blind rage. He was going to make Jason wish he had never crossed him. Ethan wasn't the kind of man who sought revenge just for the sake of it. He believed in loyalty, in trust, in the kind of respect that couldn't be bought or faked. Jason had shattered all of that.
And now?
Now, Ethan was going to make sure Jason regretted every single second of his betrayal. He started small. A whisper here, a seed of doubt there. Jason had always been cocky, always walked around like he owned the room. But confidence could crack under the right pressure. Ethan made sure of it. The first move was subtle, too subtle for Jason to see coming. Ethan made a point to be unbothered. He went to the same places, hung out with the same people, and laughed just as easily as he had before. If anything, he seemed happier, more at ease. And that drove Jason insane. Because Jason had expected a confrontation. He had expected Ethan to snap, to throw punches, to scream. But instead, Ethan treated him like an afterthought. Like he didn't even matter. Liam was the first to notice. "Dude," Liam muttered one night as they sat at a bar, drinks in hand. "Jason looks like he's losing his mind." Ethan smirked, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Good." Across the room, Jason was seated at a booth with a few mutual friends, but his eyes kept darting toward Ethan, his fingers tapping anxiously against the table. Mia wasn't with him. She had tried to reach out to Ethan a few times, half-hearted texts, awkward apologies, but he had ignored every single one. She wasn't worth his time. Jason, though? Jason had made this personal. And Ethan was just getting started. The next move was a little more direct. Ethan started talking to the right people in the right places, knowing the words would eventually get back to Jason. "You know," he said casually to a group of friends one night, his voice carrying just enough, "I feel kinda bad for Mia." One of the guys, Ryan, raised a brow. "Bad for her? Why?" Ethan shrugged, his smirk lazy. "She left a loyal guy for someone who's never been able to hold on to anything good in his life.
You know Jason, man.
He gets bored easily. She's just another phase." The group murmured in agreement, a few nodding, a few exchanging knowing glances. Because Ethan wasn't lying. Jason had always been impulsive, always chasing the next thrill. Everyone knew it. And within a day, Jason knew exactly what Ethan had said. The next time they crossed paths, Jason didn't look nearly as smug as before. In fact, he looked pissed. "You got something to say to me?" Jason challenged, shoving a hand in his pocket as he stared Ethan down. Ethan barely spared him a glance. "Nope."
He sipped his drink. "Why?"
"You feeling guilty about something?" Jason clenched his jaw. "I don't regret anything." Ethan chuckled. "That's cute. You think I care." Jason stiffened, his fists clenching, but Ethan just turned away, like Jason wasn't even worth his time.
And that burned.
Because Jason had won the battle. He had taken Mia. He had crossed the line. But Ethan had won the war. Because Jason would never be able to shake the feeling that he hadn't actually won anything at all. Jason had always thrived on reactions. He loved getting under people's skin, pushing buttons, making sure they felt his presence. But Ethan? Ethan was giving him nothing. And that was driving Jason insane. For the next few weeks, Ethan kept up the game. He didn't need to throw punches, didn't need to shout or cause a scene. He just had to exist. He had to be unbothered. Every time Jason saw him, Ethan was laughing, relaxed, as if none of this had ever touched him. As if Jason and Mia were a joke that didn't even deserve his attention.
It worked.
Jason started unraveling. First, it was the way he lingered too long whenever Ethan was around, as if waiting for a confrontation that never came. Then it was his temper, snapping at people over little things, losing that cool, cocky demeanor. The final crack came at a party. It was one of those crowded, dimly lit places where music pulsed too loudly, where people lost themselves in the chaos of the night. Ethan hadn't planned to stay long, just long enough to let Jason see him, just long enough to let him wonder. Mia was there too. She hadn't looked at Jason all night. She was drinking, talking to her friends, but her eyes kept darting toward Ethan. And Jason noticed. Ethan could see it. The way Jason's grip tightened around his glass, the way his jaw twitched, the way he seethed. Jason had gotten what he wanted. He had taken Ethan's girl. But it wasn't enough, was it? Because now he was watching her watch Ethan. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Jason slammed his drink down and stormed across the room, his temper finally breaking. You think this is funny? Ethan barely turned his head. Think what's funny? Jason's hands curled into fists. This little act. Walking around like you don't care. Like you're better than me. Ethan smirked. I don't think I'm better than you, Jason. I know I am. Jason snapped. He swung first. Wild, reckless. Ethan sidestepped easily, barely even trying, and Jason stumbled forward, knocking over a table. The music screeched to a halt as people turned, whispering, watching. Ethan exhaled slowly, shaking his head. You really wanted me to react this badly, huh? Jason pushed himself up, face red with anger, but Ethan just gave him a pitying look. Go ahead, Ethan said smoothly. Throw another punch. See how that works out for you. Jason hesitated, fists still clenched, but the room had already turned against him. People were whispering, shaking their heads.
Mia?
She was staring at Jason like she was finally seeing him for what he was. And that was the final nail in the coffin. Jason had ruined everything for a victory that was never his to begin with. Ethan leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so only Jason could hear. You didn't steal anything from me, Jason. He smirked. You just proved why you'll never be me. Jason stood there, shaking with rage, but it didn't matter anymore. Ethan had already won. Jason stood there, breathing heavily, his fists still clenched, but there was nothing left for him to do. He had lost in the worst way possible, not in some big, dramatic fight, but in silence, in the way the people around him looked at him now. Like he was pathetic. Like he had tried so hard to break Ethan, only to end up shattering himself instead. Ethan watched it all with quiet amusement, arms crossed as he leaned back, waiting to see if Jason had anything left in him. But there was nothing. Jason's anger was empty now, aimless. He had already played his hand, and he had lost. Mia was the first to walk away. She didn't say a word to Jason. She didn't defend him, didn't try to pick up the pieces of his ego. She just looked at him, shook her head, and left. Jason looked like he had been slapped.
Ethan almost felt bad for him.
Almost. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough that only Jason could hear. Was it worth it? Jason's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. You did all this because you wanted to be the guy who took something from me. But you never took anything. He leaned in, his voice dropping to something sharper. You just proved to everyone that you'll always be in my shadow. Jason flinched, his hands trembling at his sides. He wanted to fight back, wanted to say something, anything, but there was nothing left to say. Ethan had won without even trying. With a final smirk, Ethan clapped Jason on the shoulder, the way an older brother might console a younger sibling who had just embarrassed himself. Better luck next time, man. And with that, he walked away. Jason didn't follow. He couldn't, because there was no coming back from this. Not for him. Ethan left the party feeling lighter than he had in weeks. He had never needed revenge, never needed to sink to Jason's level. All he had needed to do was be himself. Because in the end, that had been enough. Jason had spent all this time trying to take something from him. But the truth was, Jason had only ever been fighting a battle against himself.
And Ethan?
Ethan had never needed to lift a finger. Ethan walked out of the party, the night air cool against his skin. The tension that had once gripped his chest was gone, replaced with something lighter. Satisfaction, maybe. Or just relief. He had proven his point without ever having to play Jason's game. But the night wasn't over just yet. As he reached the sidewalk, a voice called out behind him. Ethan. He turned to find Mia standing there, her arms crossed, her expression unsure. He raised a brow. What? She hesitated, as if debating what to say, then sighed. I didn't know Jason would. Don't. Ethan cut in, his voice calm but firm. Don't make excuses for him. Mia flinched, her lips pressing together. I'm not. I made a mistake, okay? I should have never. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. You knew exactly what you were doing, Mia. He tilted his head, studying her. You wanted the thrill, the excitement. You thought you were trading stability for something better. She opened her mouth, but he wasn't done. But the truth is, you didn't pick Jason because he was better than me, Ethan continued, his voice steady. You picked him because you wanted someone who made you feel better about yourself. And now that the excitement is gone, you're realizing you never actually wanted him. Mia looked away, her shoulders tensing. Ethan exhaled slowly. He wasn't angry anymore. Maybe he had been once.
But now?
Now, he just felt indifferent. I'm not mad at you, Mia, he said finally. But I'm not interested in whatever this is, either. He gestured between them. You made your choice. And I'm making mine. Mia swallowed, nodding stiffly.
Right.
Yeah. Ethan gave her one last glance before turning away, walking off into the night without looking back. Mia had been a chapter in his life, but that chapter was over. And he was ready for whatever came next. As Ethan walked away, he felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't triumph, and it wasn't regret. It was just closure. A quiet understanding that some things weren't meant to last, and some people weren't worth chasing after. Jason would live with the weight of his own choices, forever stuck in a cycle of his own making. Mia would move on, always searching for something she would never quite find. And Ethan? Ethan would be just fine. He didn't need to prove anything. He didn't need revenge or apologies. He had his self-respect, his dignity, and the knowledge that he had walked away without losing himself in the mess they had created. As he stepped into the quiet night, the city lights stretching before him, Ethan smiled to himself. This wasn't the end. It was just a new beginning.